There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?"
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And now your host, Stephen Hanks.
During the summer of 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic was getting out of control, especially in New York, where I was living at the time, we were on lockdown, and with a lot of free time in my hands, I began writing essays on the platform Medium. One of those essays was titled Disillusionment and the Demise of American Exceptionalism. And at that point, before another eroding of American exceptionalism on January 6, 2021, there was plenty for this patriotic progressive to be disillusioned about, especially since the election of Donald Trump. There was disillusionment in knowing that 63 million Americans had voted for a racist and misogynist in the 2016 election. There was disillusionment in knowing that an American president had help in being elected by and was being manipulated by the authoritarian leader of Russia. There was disillusionment in knowing that an American president and his family were using the presidency to grow their personal piggy bank. There was disillusionment in knowing that the president was using the Department of Justice to do his personal bidding. There was disillusionment about the millions of Americans who during a pandemic were fighting mask mandates, compelling me at the time to write that, quote, "Our country is populated with millions of stupid, stubborn, selfish, self-centered, and ultimately self-destructive semi-humans who seem totally ignorant about what rights and freedom truly mean in a democracy." And that was before the vaccine deniers and the election deniers reared their ugly heads. But when I wrote that essay 4 years ago, there was one aspect of American culture I wasn't quite disillusioned about, but I am now. And in a profoundly sad way, because my career was as a magazine journalist and editor. And that disillusionment is over the current state of the American mainstream media and what were once some of our gloried press institutions, specifically the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post. While the New York Times ultimately came around to endorsing Kamala Harris for president, the paper not only spent the previous 8 years normalizing Donald Trump, they went out of their way to demean Joe Biden at every turn because he wouldn't give them interviews, play their, quote, "we treat both sides the same," unquote, objectivity game, and hold Kamala Harris to a higher standard than they ever held Donald Trump. But as disappointing as that may be, what's even worse is the stories that broke the past few days regarding both the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post deciding they were not going to endorse a candidate for president in this election. And in both cases, the editorial boards of these once esteemed newspapers were prepared to publish endorsements of Kamala Harris, but the oligarch owner/publishers quashed those endorsements. In the case of the Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, the speculation is that Bezos is hedging his bets in case Trump is elected because he doesn't want retribution against both the Post and Amazon. Well, folks, the retribution against those decisions are happening as editors at those papers are resigning and tens of thousands of readers are canceling subscriptions. I canceled mine months ago. These decisions not to endorse Harris for president came mere days after reports published in those very papers that Donald Trump's former chief of staff called him a fascist who admired Adolf Hitler, which at any previous time in our history would have been disqualifying. And these decisions not to endorse Kamala Harris for president is after 8 or 9 years of Donald Trump calling the news media, quote, the enemy of the people, unquote, and his most recent statements about seeking to destroy, quote, the enemy within, unquote, in America, which means, among other things, that Donald Trump would end freedom of the press in this country. Disheartening, demoralizing, disillusioning.